Welcome to Sermon Brainwave with me, Matt Skinner.
And me, Karoline Lewis.
And me, Rolf Jacobson.
The texts for the fourth Sunday of Easter, which falls on April 25th, 2021 this year, are Acts 4, 1 through 12, Psalm 23, 1 John 3, 16 through 24, and John 10, 11 through 18.
I caught that little Acts 4, 1 through 12.
I did add some verses already. I just thought
you didn't even like propose it. You just said,
I know.
Just changed it right on the spot.
I know. It's the power of the one who reads the text at the beginning.
I know.
Our friend and partner, Joy Moore, is taking a couple of weeks off because she's also the dean of a seminary, in case people didn't know that. And sometimes that job, I hear, gets really busy. But we miss Joy, but we're going to try to carry on without her.
Right.
For Sunday, you're right, Karoline.
It's Psalm 23 Sunday.
It's also Good Shepherd Sunday.
Well, I think we know where we're going to settle in. First John is going to have a hard time getting a word in.
I think First John is going to is going to have a hard time. But let's start with the gospel, of course. And yes, we've got Good Shepherd Sunday, which is always the fourth Sunday of Easter.
Psalm 23 Sunday.
What?
It's Psalm 23 Sunday.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Because every year it's Psalm 23.
That's true. And every year it's also John 10.
Isn't there a Psalm 23 Sunday like every month?
It seems like it, doesn't it?
Should be.
Or every other month. But every year, of course, we get the readings from John 10. Year A is John 10, 1 through 10. Year B, John 10, 11 to 18. And year C, John 10, 22 to 30, which has nothing to do with John 10, 1 to 18, but it has to do with sheep. Therefore, we put it on Good Shepherd Sunday. And John 10, 1 to 10 doesn't really talk about sheep and more about the door. But we don't have any good door or gate hymns. So we have gone with Good Shepherd.
Actually, there are those good hymns, but keep going.
Okay.
So these are the best verses you're telling us.
What's that?
These are the most appropriate verses, perhaps, for a Sunday called.
That was a long way of saying that, yes. But I think I say this every year. But I'm going to say it again. The wider context, of course, is that
the healing of the man born blind.
Yes, thank you, Rolf. You remember every year. You remember. Thank you. And it is. I think it's particularly, poignant maybe or meaningful this year when we think about the ways in which. Through this pandemic, we've had this sense of maybe not being cast out, but being outside of our worship spaces. The parents of the man born blind are worried about aposynagogas, being thrown out of the synagogue, and then of course the man born blind is thrown out in 934, and then Jesus finds him. And just as he found his disciples back in chapter 1. And so that's the first place I land this year, is that that sense of being cast out, maybe not literally, but that sense of feeling cast out from our places of worship. And the promise in this text is that Jesus finds us in that space, wherever that space is, wherever that place is. And brings us into his fold, a fold that is full of nurture and protection, a fold that is a place of pasture and abundant life, of relationship. And so how is it that we can cast this very familiar metaphor for Jesus in such a way that we're not going down the trail of, the stupid sheep, and they don't follow, and sheep are really whatever, but really see this as a discipleship narrative, as a calling of this man born blind, and the comfort that we also get, of course, from Psalm 23 of our shepherd who finds us and brings us into the fold. And brings us into that space, that protective space. So that's the first place I landed this year.
that image of being known, I think, is so powerful, especially
Mhm.
like you said, in the past year plus. I know so many people who have been so isolated and have had to cope with living very alone, even if they've got connections digitally. And but this idea of a shepherd who knows you, and a preacher might even jump to the other place in John where it talks about knowing by name as well, just to have your name known. I mean, I would play around with this as a preacher. I'm so worried about all the names I'm going to forget when I see folks in real life, that and when I don't have the little name thing on their box on Zoom. uh, but this idea of being forgotten and wondering if, knowing there's a world out there that's still moving. So not that this text is only about that, but it certainly speaks to that moment, and this life of disconnection.
Yeah, I think, were you going to say something, Rolf?
Go ahead, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, I think that is also really meaningful, of that sense of being known, and that it in part recasts how we, this would be maybe another homiletical direction, but how do we define the word good, the good shepherd? And it doesn't necessarily have to be in juxtaposition to the opposite of a bad shepherd. But how is it, and I'm not entirely sure that that's what's going on with John here, but that's another podcast in another direction. But how is it that he's good? And for the preacher to unpack that a little bit and say, it's not just that Jesus lays down his life. And in fact, and oftentimes that the immediate recourse for that verse is to go to the cross, when in fact Jesus has laid down his life, or God has laid down God's life in the incarnation, and Jesus will give up his life at the arrest in John 18 before we ever get to the cross. And so how do we think about this word good, and all that surrounds that, of being known, of being in relationship, of I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. It just really kind of exploding that adjective, that is so simple but yet so ambiguous here. And there's so many possibilities to think of. What does it mean to have a good shepherd? I think there could be a lot of possibility there.
I mean, I do think that there's continuity with the Old Testament here, and not just with Psalm 23. That shepherd is a royal term, and so good shepherd is a messianic claim. God says, God fires the shepherds of Israel in Ezekiel and Jeremiah, and then says, I myself will shepherd my people. And so then you get in the incarnation that continuity, that God's very self will be king, shepherd. And maybe the good is a little bit then in contrast to other human royal claims over. I mean, even go back to Pharaoh, and whose people are these anyway? Who's the Lord? God is. We belong to God rather than any little tin dictator. What I was going to say is, and I've said this before, I'm sure, in continuity with what you guys were saying a minute ago about I know my sheep. I've told this story before, but a family friend who was at a county fair, and he's a farmer and an expert sheep breeder. And while he was helping some kids at the county fair, someone stole his sheep. They went to his farm, went into his barn, and stole his sheep. And he thought to himself, who could that have been? And he had a suspicion of who it was. It was from a different county. And that county fair was 2 weeks later. So he went to the other county fair and went into the sheep barn. And the sheep started crying for him, and he recognized them. They'd been re-tagged. My dad said to him, "Oh, come on. Are you going to tell me that you can recognize your sheep?" He goes, "Absolutely. I know my sheep." And, I mean, think about the claim that is what might look to us as indistinguishable creatures from each other. God knows us that way. God knows us that well. And out of the billions of people, God knows everyone individually. So I just, yeah, that's all. Just wanted to say that. To me,
Somebody stole my dog. My dog would definitely come looking for me. Just saying. But that's really inverting the metaphor. So
good boy.
Psalm 23 probably helps unpack what it means to be a good shepherd as opposed to a, average shepherd, a mediocre shepherd.
The average shepherd. Yeah, Joel Lamont, I think we ran Joel Lamont's commentary this year on the website, which is well done. What speaks to you from Psalm 23 this year? Because as we were joking, it does come up 3 or 4 times a year, certain years. And then I've said everything I can say about Psalm 23 over the years on the podcast.
Well, I really, go ahead. Well, I really appreciated Joel's framing it within this journey. I mean, obviously, I read this commentary 6 years ago, but now hearing it this year, and a journey that Yahweh oversees and guides. I don't think I ever really had that sense of Psalm 23, of the way in which God is accompanying us in this in this path of through the valleys and such. And so I that's what I latched onto this year, especially as we move forward in this hopefully post-pandemic world, but this sense of that accompaniment of God and that abundance of God in the midst of this path we find ourselves on. Again, like you said, Matt, is a descriptor of what it means for God to be good. So I really like that this year. I know you didn't like the word journey, but that was for Lent, Rolf.
I love the word journey. I just don't
like it for Lent.
I don't like the metaphor for Lent, but
yeah.
And I'm sure you especially liked, although Joel didn't quite explain it fully, the argument about whether the verb in the last phrase is shuv or yeshav, the text critical argument. I mean, that's a serious, but either way, actually, it means the same thing syntactically, which is that the goal, the end point of the journey is dwelling with God. And so that it is a journey on which God is both the accompanier, the guider, but also the destination. So I think that is, I actually think it's a great metaphor for the Christian life.
It's such a comforting psalm in so many ways. And sometimes that's really helpful for a Sunday to have a psalm that's not super intense or telling you to go out there and do something or to, rediscover the radical nature of the gospel. I mean, this is one that's almost the equivalent of my yoke is easy, my burden light. If I can jump to a synoptic here, that God will take care of you. So in the midst of that, I jumped to 6a, which is maybe the most active part of the whole psalm, and Joel's discussion there of what it means, how you might translate it, and changing the words of a really popular piece of liturgy or scripture always can get you in a little bit of trouble, but it also can help people see things in a new light. So I like that idea of, instead of surely goodness and mercy shall follow me, right? Only goodness and mercy shall pursue me is a way of rethinking that, right? Who are the predators out there? What are the dangers out there? Nothing is pursuing you now except for the goodness and the mercy of God, which will track you down wherever you are.
It's really a stunning mistranslation to translate that as follow, which goes back to King James. I mean, it's so that the idea is that God's internal qualities, and this happens in a couple other Psalms, are anthropomorphized as goodness and mercy will pursue me. And so, it really lines up with, I think it's, maybe we have this next week in John, You did not choose me, I chose you. Is that next week already? It's coming up. And that is, it's the sense of God's agency choosing us and pursuing us. We run away, and God's not waiting passively for us to return, but God tracks us down.
Which might make a good connection, to back to John, if you're wanting to, if you're wanting to find some overlap there in that for the
I was
man.
assuming you would make that connection.
Oh, good.
Back to John.
But the fact that, Jesus heals the man born blind, and then really after the miracle disappears from the drama until he hears that the man has been thrown out, and then finds him. And so there's what we get in John 9 and 10 is actually an embodiment of that pursual, in Jesus finding the man who's been cast out. So that if you go that direction, that could be a connection as well.
Since we're kind of in a Johannine vein, maybe we should just talk about 1 John 3 for a second, because to me, that's such a contrast, because here's a passage that says, he laid down his life for us. We ought to do that for one another, which we don't. Right? What happens when you see somebody in need and you don't help? I mean, this is one here's a text that's the opposite of Psalm 23 for me in terms of the mood it creates. This is one that makes me think, oh dear, I'm falling so incredibly short. While Psalm 23 is much more of a relax. So, it's a way to think about the mood of a sermon and how these texts might line up and complement, but also in some ways clash as well in terms of how they're going to be heard. And sometimes that depends upon where somebody is in their own life and their own circumstances. But just to note that I think a lot of people hear 1 John 3 and they think, I want to know what church that's real in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think with 1 John, in part what it foreshadows, or in part what it in terms of its relation, perhaps to the gospel or not, but that's really what Jesus is going to be talking about, right, in the farewell discourse, is that there's something at stake here, is what 1 John is trying to get at, that the community is accountable or responsible for embodying this kind of love that they've experienced, and that this is not love in the abstract, and just as Jesus' love for the man born blind is not abstract, there's a concreteness to it, and there's a concreteness to Jesus as the shepherd. This is not like, oh, this is a really nice metaphor and let's put it on a stained glass window. And but there is going to be an accountability and responsibility to how is it that the world is going to know that this is the hallmark of this community of love. And so I think you're right, Matt. It's like you hear that language of comfort, but at this place you're hearing language of responsibility and commandment. And I guess only the preacher can know on which side do you lean on this particular Sunday.
One of the great I don't know, accidents, I'm looking for a better word, and my brain fails me this morning because I haven't quite fully woken up. But the chapters and numbers of verses. The chapters were added about the year 1000, and the numbers like 1700. So they're really late, and so they don't mean anything. But it is great that John 3:16 is God so loved the world that he gave his only son, and First John 3:16 is we know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives. So it's a great teaching tool rhetorically to pair those. So God's love and then our love for one another because of God's love. It goes great together.
I like that, Rolf.
I wish Bishop Lowell Erdahl, my favorite bishop, and my child, when I was a child, he was the pastor. He was my pastor. Taught me that little rhetorical device. And once I heard it from him, you never forget it, right? So, but
Did
I
he
also
did he have you memorize all the 3:16s of the Bible?
no, and he wouldn't do that. And
I
we
just
moved
looked
in.
up Acts 3:16 just to be sure it's okay.
Well, I know Leviticus 3:16 is all fat belongs to the Lord. So, you know, but I also like in this, I also like verse 18, little children, and that follows after whoever sees it says in the NRC, brother or sister. So you've got this family language for the community, fictive kinship language in the New Testament, maybe because people had been cast out of their own families in part for becoming Christian, that then the Christians call each other brother and sister, and then here children. So you've got, but then especially, let us love not in word or speech, but in truth and action. In America, love is often reduced to emotions. And in the New Testament, it is not. It is a set of actions that you do and do not do. So love is not interiorized and emotionalized as we have done so. So I think that's a powerful message for communities today too. But let's go to Acts. Let's go to Acts for a minute, Matt. I have one hard question for you, but I'm going to save it for 1 minute.
And somebody added verses already.
Yeah.
So what's up with that, Matt?
I did. I mentioned in the commentary that I think the first 4 verses are pretty important. It describes the arrest. So verse 5 picks up with the dialogue between the leadership and Peter and John, and it wouldn't hurt you to read 4 verses so that people know how they were arrested, but also in who they arrested and why. So there's some important details there. Not only arrested, but then also held in prison overnight, which you don't want to retroject our laws and rights onto the ancient world. I mean, did they have the right to do this? Absolutely, pretty much. Was it probably a miserable night in custody? Almost certainly, from what we know about those kinds of conditions in the ancient world. I mean, it just helps remind us that this is really serious business. This is not a casual conversation among different factions in Jerusalem. This is a really uneven battle in terms of who's got power at hand. Other than that, no real strong reasons.
Other than you can't really understand the passage without those verses. That's all.
Well, that issue of power is, of course, something that you talk about in your commentary, Matt. But in particular, the line or the section of your commentary that I really appreciated with regard to this passage is when you talk about it, it's not their Jewishness, and I think that was an important argument that makes them resistant to the apostolic message. Their problem is that they presume they have power to put a lid on the good news. And as you've talked about and helped me see in the book of Acts, that this good news is going to travel and interrupt lives regardless, and we think we can have a kind of control over it, or as you said, put a lid on the good news and the way in which it just constantly explodes out of that any kind of container. And I think that would be a really powerful Easter message, to connect back to Easter, that the tomb, that reality of, the tomb, that stone can't contain the good news, that just really playing with that metaphor, and that the risen Christ is out there, and nothing is going to contain that good news. And so, yeah, I really appreciated that.
It's why I think it's brilliant that Acts is a sign during Easter. You simply can't talk about the resurrection without imagining that there are implications for everything about how we live our lives. And Acts, in a sense, lives into that enthusiasm. I don't know the right word to use, that energy, that sense of your horizons might be way too narrow, your thinking might be way too small. because it's the power of God we're talking about here. Finally,
Mhm.
right? That's
Mhm.
that word name, the name of Jesus is, essentially that. But I've said that in the commentary. You go ahead, Rolf.
I love how the early church could not tell the story of Jesus' passion and resurrection without the Psalms, and so that the Psalms show up everywhere. And this enigmatic verse for me in Psalm 118, you helped a lot. Actually, you helped me understand Psalm 118. The stone that I don't know if cornerstone is actually the right word in Psalm 118, but the stone that the builders rejected. So they're building something with stone, maybe the temple, maybe battlements, but something. And they look at one stone and they go, no, it's not been cut right. And so they throw it out. And then that actually then becomes the most important stone, whether it's the keystone of the arch, like you said, or the cornerstone, which if you lay it right, then the whole thing, gets built better. That was really helpful. And that the church goes to that verse to explain Jesus. I mean, that's pretty powerful. The one question I was going to ask
Though,
you,
right? Is if this guy was really the Messiah, how did our leaders miss it? I mean, that's one of the early questions
yeah,
the church has to reckon with.
yeah, no, exactly. So the question I have is, did you duck or did I miss it? The exclusive claim at the end, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no name under heaven given among mortals by which we must be saved.
It didn't come up in the commentary. I didn't spend a lot of time there. Maybe ducking it. Maybe, I already went over my word count.
Fair enough.
And 7 footnotes.
Well, speaking of word count, we are already over our word count for this podcast. Thank you for listening. And we hope that you'll listen next week.